Hey, theology fans. This is Getting Sidetracked with Pastor Clemmer. Today we're going to talk about, we use my handy editing tools here. We're going to talk about socialism. Socialism has been on really the country's mind for a while, but it's been on my mind for a few years now, especially ever since we had one of the Democratic candidates, now more than one, running on that platform. And even as we see that trickle down into the conversations amongst our youth in the school systems and how they're being taught to think about socialism and how it's being portrayed to them. Also, in the way that it's being portrayed in the media, I think about some conversations like with AOC, the Senator Cortez, and I think it's Cortez. What's AOC stand for? Shows my. I'm so used to calling her AOC, I forgot. Anyway, um, she kind of would make the case that there's people making way too much money, and that's not right. That's egregious and sinful. I think she used that word, or evil, and so money should be taken from them and used to help the poor. So a seemingly like good argument. There's people who are hungry and people who have way too much. So the people with way too much should help the people who are hungry. And when you got to, often it's even cast within Christianity as Jesus who wants to help the poor, who wants to help the needy, who wants to show love. Wouldn't then Jesus also be an advocate of socialism? That is, taking from the wealthy to help the poor. So I kind of started teaching this more directly to the youth a couple of years ago, and it seemed to be helpful. So it's just kind of on my mind for today, even as we go into another election cycle. And I know it's kind of been in the air for a while. So just briefly today, socialism, to oversimplify this, obviously there's many different facets, but it's particularly where it's interesting to us as to think about it from a Christian perspective, is the socialist view regarding personal property. So the whole concept of personal property is there's stuff that belongs to me and you can't have it. All right. I can give it to you as a gift, but if it doesn't belong to me, I can't give it to you as a gift because it's not mine to give. I can't walk over into our sanctuary and grab a hymnal and just give it away to people because it's not mine. It's the church's to give. If the church says to do that, it's a different thing. But this picture here that my wife gave me for Christmas a couple years ago, it's mine. She gave it to me for Christmas. If you come into my office and take it from me, that's stealing because I've got personal property. So as Christians, we really, and this goes back ultimately to Old Testament Judaism, the institution, we talked about institutions in Sidetrack before, God instituting things in this world that he ordered in this world. He ordered us to have personal property. He gave land to people. He established personal property, and we see it codified when he gives the 7th commandment. So the 7th commandment regarding stealing, my super cool arrows down there. The 7th commandment regarding stealing, thou shalt not steal. So when God said thou shalt not steal, what that commandment assumes is that there has to be something to steal. So that is, I can't, if there's no personal property, if everybody just owns everything, then there's no concept of stealing, right? Because there's no personal property belonging to anyone. And that's really built into the whole concept of socialism, where we would take issue with it as Christians. And in fact, Christians throughout history, where socialist regimes have emerged, Christians and Jews are often the ones who are persecuted. And this is one of the reasons why, because they're holding forth for personal property. So when the government establishes a system in which they say everything belongs to the collective, and we as the government determine how much of this general stuff, the general money, the general wealth, the general property, we determine how that's allocated throughout the economy. That removes from me a sense of personal property. So the government gives me what they think I'm entitled to, and they take from me what they think I'm not entitled to. so that kind of goes back to what I mentioned with AOC before. When we're looking at a person who's got too many billions of dollars, the Christian is able to say, well, no, God has given them those billions of dollars. Now, they might be misusing it. It might be leading them to sin. They might even be attaining it in some cases through sinful means. And then in that case, we would say God's not giving it to them. But we are able to recognize that if I'm a basketball player who's 7 feet tall and is really athletic and I'm making millions and millions of dollars, who made me 7 feet tall? But God. Who gave me the athletic ability? But God. If I'm a software engineer that makes millions of dollars, who gave me that intellectual capacity? Who gave me the parents that I have to send me to the schools that I went to and so forth? So ultimately, we recognize that a person's financial success in this world ultimately comes as a gift from God. So when I see someone who's making $1 billion, I don't say they're making too much, or I don't say that that's not fair. I say, thanks be to God. So I help my neighbor to improve and protect his possessions and income. That's what the 7th Commandment asks of us to do. So not take it from them because there's people over there who are poor. Now, what's helpful in this too is that when I'm able to recognize that this person over here who has the personal property of billions of dollars, he is then free, whether he's motivated by Christian motivations or others. He's able to look at the poor and needy and say, I want to give them some of my excess income to help them. For a Christian perspective, we'd say he'd be motivated by love to do so. Also by the law that calls us to love our neighbor more than ourselves. If you got 2 cloaks, give to the guy who doesn't have any. So, but the Christian is set free then to say, all right, there's a person over there who needs food. I can take from my food, my money, and help them. So, but when the government steps in and says, no, we're going to establish a program to do this for you. So we're going to look at what you're making and take an amount that we see fit because we think you're making too much money. And we're going to give it to these over here who are making less money. Then all of a sudden we're stepping into the realm of socialism and starting to breach the personal property line because I can looking at what you have and say, you've got too much. And you're not entitled to that much. And this person over here is entitled to more. I'm going to take from you and give to them. And if you ultimately think this through, if you say, no, you can't take this from me, when the government ultimately comes to you and says, oh, yes, we are going to take it from you, and you say no, at a certain point, they're going to have to come and take it. They'll confiscate it from you, like we'd say confiscatory taxes or something. They take it from you with a gun, handcuffs. What do we call it when someone takes something from a person with a gun? Stealing, right? Now, we've got some biblical pictures of this, namely in the Old Testament in, I believe it's 1 Kings 21, I think it is, with Naboth's vineyard, with King Ahab, or is it 2 Kings 21? Anyway, 1st or 2 Kings 21. And if you're not familiar with that story, check it out. But in Naboth's vineyard, the general idea is that King Ahab saw Naboth with a really cool vineyard. He said, I want that vineyard. He goes and asks Naboth if he can have it. And Naboth says to King Ahab, who represents the government of the day, he said, no, it's mine. It's been given to me, passed through my family, ultimately his personal property. So no. Well, then Jezebel, Ahab's wife, who's a pagan, says, aren't you the king? You can take whatever you want. And so she intervenes and ultimately establishes a way to kill Naboth and take his stuff and then give it over to Ahab. And ultimately, when Ahab dies, that's the reason why the prophets say he was killed, because he took Naboth's vineyard. So Naboth's vineyard is an Old Testament example where the government looks down and says, I want that, and I can take it by force. Now, this does get into an interesting question of taxes. So how do taxes fit into the whole picture of socialism? And to be fair, it is complicated because the government doesn't come in and make a distinction always between what money is taken from you and given to this person in an entitlement program. But I think not to get into the specifics necessarily right here, but rather to give us clarity of thought as Christians. When the government starts to go at a person because they're making too much money. Or they're saying, we're going to take more from you because we think you don't deserve to have that. And that's the language that's being used. I mean, even the quote fair tax is being thrown around right now. It's like the idea is that it's not fair or it is fair because we're going to take money away from the really, really rich to help those in greater need. And those in the middle, which is the majority, are going to be less affected by this. And so that's fair. Well, since when is it fair for someone to come to me and take my stuff? That's not fair, right? That's unjust. It breaks the 7th commandment, thou shalt not steal, right? So we just want to have clarity on what stealing is and what personal property is. So we recognize that God has given us what we have, some more, some less. In many cases, those with more, the stuff they have becomes entanglement for them. It leads them to sin in various ways. Often those without are often have idols of material things in the same way. So their lack of possessions ends up being sinful. But generally speaking, the more your hands are filled up with earthly possessions, the less you feel like you need to cling to the Lord and His mercy and His forgiveness. So unfortunately, we see in places where there's greater poverty, there's actually a greater surge in the faith, in Christianity. Anyway, just to wrap this thing up. So again, to have us thinking clearly as Christians regarding the issue of socialism, the key for me would be the 7th commandment, thou shalt not steal. Also, the first article of the creed, the Lord has given us our stuff. He's created us, and He's given us all that we have. Some He's given different abilities than others. Some given those abilities have led to greater wealth than others. So God's given us what we have, and the 7th commandment calls us to help our neighbor to keep and preserve that. Now, according to my Christian freedom, I can then take what I have and use it to share with those in need, to share with the poor, motivated by love and Christian freedom. Also even driven by the Lord's law to serve my neighbor. But in neither case is the government stepping in. In fact, when the government steps in and forces me to give my money to the poor, it ceases to be love, right? If it's mandated, it's not a gift. So generally speaking, that's the issue, that one main issue that we take with the concept of socialism is that it denounces personal property, says all property belongs to the collective, and the collective determines how to redistribute the wealth or spread the wealth around, as the popular language from Obama a number of years ago. So we'd say you can't spread wealth around because it's been given to me, so you can't take it from me and spread it to others. That's stealing. So I hope that's helpful for you. I mean, really, it doesn't help us out of the mess that we find ourselves in, except if we can be better and more clear in teaching our people and teaching our children of the Lord's institutions of personal property, that He has given us what we have. We are called to preserve it and protect it for our neighbor. You can't take it from them. That's stealing. And also making that distinction when it comes to taxation. I mean, even the whole concept of income tax is a relatively new innovation in the history of America. Before, all the tax income was generated from like levies and tariffs and those type things on purchases and goods. So it wasn't as much like you're making a lot of money and I'm entitled to a greater percentage of it. So it's getting into the area of confiscatory taxes, where we're taxing those who make more, we're taking more from them. Now we're getting dangerously close to the Naboth's vineyard scenario. Again, there will be a day when the government might come and take all that we have and take they our goods, fame, child, and wife, as Luther writes in A Mighty Fortress. We know that there will be a day when we're persecuted by the state or by the world. They'll take what we have, and we ultimately know that the victory ours remaineth. The Lord is with us. He fights by our side in the plain, and He's won the final victory for us on the cross. So we need not fear. However, in the short run, on this side of heaven, we are given to love our neighbor. And so as we look at it from a 7th commandment perspective, we're called to help our neighbor to preserve and protect and improve his possessions and income. And socialism, both historically and practically speaking, can't achieve that goal. So I hope that's helpful for you. The Lord be with you.